Bernie's campaign manager, Faz Shakir, absolutely, positively ran circles around CNN host Brian Stelter. They're discussing corporate media and the many ways they fall short doing their jobs. This is really a glorious clip.
Tensions between the Sanders camp and MSNBC have been especially high. You might think those would be natural allies. So let's find out more about these media bias complaints. Joining me now is the campaign manager for Sanders 2020, Faz Shakir. Great to see you. You're in Detroit. You're getting ready for the debate. We're 2 days away. Do you have expectations for this debate versus NBC's debates? Were there problems with NBC other than those technical glitches, for example?
Brian, I'm going to make a radical comment. This isn't a criticism of CNN. It's really a criticism of the media environment. But I believe these debates tend to make the American people stupider. They're performative theater, and we don't end up having the conversations that affect people's lives. So I don't have super high expectations. I think we're going to try to go through it and answer the questions, respond to Donald Trump's tweets and all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, this isn't, I think, how you win a campaign.
How do you win a campaign then? Because y'all have been complaining a lot about the media coverage. Don't you need journalists to be out there on the trail with Sanders covering the campaign?
Brian, you know this well, that Bernie Sanders talks to journalists all the time. He talks to Rachel Maddow, talks to George Stephanopoulos, was meeting with a number of media outlets even this week on Jimmy Kimmel and others, getting the message out. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we know and we understand we're a campaign that's built out of taking on power, taking on established power, arguing against the corruption of the political system, the economic system, and in many cases, the media system. And so in order to get that particular message out, you got to go directly to voters. And that's why you hear us trying to build these media channels, talking directly to people.
And Sanders has been doing that for decades, going back to his days in Burlington with public access TV. The difference now is he can reach a lot more people on YouTube. What is the heart of the critique about what Sanders calls the corporate media? What do you want people like me to do differently?
Well, Brian, this isn't a personal commentary on you or any other journalist. There's many wonderful, talented journalists out there. But in about, a minute or so or 2 minutes or so, you're going to cut to commercial breaks and you're going to see some pharmaceutical ads. You're going to see a lot of ads that are basically paying your bills and the bills of this the entire media enterprise. And what that ends up doing is incentivizing you and others to make sure that you're asking the questions and driving the conversations in certain areas and not in certain areas. Right now, Bernie Sanders is on a bus across.
What evidence do you have of that? I don't actually know what ads run during the breaks. I actually don't see the commercials. I don't know what runs.
And I reached out to Phil Griffin, the head of MSNBC, and happy to talk to Jeff Zucker and others. It isn't about you, Brian, but about how these media structures are set and operated and the biases that I believe are embedded within them about what they really decide are segments worthy.
Right.
What segments worthy of covering and what aren't.
So what do you think is not being covered that needs to be covered more? What are those topic areas?
Well, one classic area, of course, is, we're going across the border right now to talk about prescription drugs. Do you know why you pay so much more, 10 times more in America on prescription drugs than any other country? Does anyone know that or understand why? Do you know what the Trump administration is doing about that? Do you even know who the head of the Health and Human Services Secretary is? Do you know his background, that he worked in the pharmaceutical industry? I think Donald Trump turns out these tweets and attempts to distract all of us, and there isn't a basic conversation around the fact that he's betraying the working class by having selected a group of people to run his government who come from industry, who benefit industry, and that story is not told. And why
don't you know all that from the press? Don't you know all that from reporting?
No, that's not how I know it. I've done my own research. We've done our own research to know it.
By reading stories, by reading news stories about it.
Yeah, and I would argue too, and you know this well, Brian, that TV is a certain medium that has an influential power, and I'm making more of a critique here of what TV media decides to cover, and it tends to be a game. It tends to be a gotcha. I appreciate that Donald Trump's tweets are important, and we'll have a conversation about that, but it also belies a conversation that he doesn't want to have, and I think that's what I think me, Bernie Sanders, a lot of us feel gets obfuscated is that the things that affect real Americans' lives.
Right, many viewers agree with you. This shiny objects, the sensationalism, it's a problem. The question is whether it's, I think, effective for you all to call it out. Maybe it is. Trump has won support from his fans by attacking the media. Maybe that's what you think will work as well.
I mean, so we're not playing a game here, right? It is truly based out of conviction and sincerity that we do see biases operating against the campaign, but also against the issues we care deeply about. You rarely see pundits on TV talking about the value of Medicare for all. You see a lot of people criticizing Medicare for all. You don't see the people talking about the value of canceling all student debt. You see people criticizing it. And why is that, right? Just ask yourself. You're taking on corporate power. You're taking on the establishment across the board. And all we're arguing for is, can we have a fair shake?
I am very, very happy that Foz is Bernie's campaign manager, because I think he knows what he's doing. I think his heart is in the right place, and I think he's incredibly intelligent. So let me jump in on this conversation a little bit here. Brian Stelter, I don't want to say he's playing dumb on purpose, but man, some of those questions were so dumb. Just acting like he's never heard these criticisms before, acting like, they're pharmaceutical. I don't even know about that, bro. Pharmaceutical. I don't even know about that, bro. So pharma, but you big pharma? What do you mean big pharma, bro? Who's big pharma? I never heard that before, bro. Okay, so let me respond to Brian Stelter. First of all, the issue is where they put the focus. So in corporate media, are you going to get the front and center stories that, you would find on this show? For example, we just covered the story about how Bernie Sanders highlighted the heartbreaking story of Amy Villela and Shalyn, Amy's daughter. Shalyn died because we don't have Medicare for all. She was rejected from the emergency room because she didn't have insurance, but she had a blood clot and she ended up dying. That's a story that we here put front and center. And basically the whole idea is, if people watch you, there's a level of trust that you're filtering everything properly and that you're painting an accurate picture of reality where you say, hey, here are the things that we care about. Now, if you come to this channel, you know what I really care about? What happened to Amy Villela and her daughter Shalyn. That, to me, is a giant scandal. Giant scandal. The 30 to 45,000 Americans dying every year because they don't have access to basic health care is a giant scandal. The deregulation and tax cuts for the rich, inevitably leading to another economic crash, is a giant scandal. Half of Americans making $30,000 a year or less is a giant scandal. 80% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck is a giant scandal. And I could go on and on. The, fact that we're bombing 8 different countries and we're waging a shadow war in Africa. The fact that we're still in Iraq and we're still in Afghanistan and they literally are endless wars and we're trying to do regime change in Venezuela and Iran and John Bolton is still in the government. I'm giving you guys what I think are giant scandals. And basically, my criteria is, how are people being impacted? Who's feeling the hurt? Who's, where is there injustice happening? Let's talk about that. That's where the focus is. Now, you watch CNN. Where do they put the focus? Are they putting it on Amy Villela and her daughter Shalyn? Are they screaming that from the rooftops? Are they talking about how there's a war on the middle class that's consistent? Are they talking about homelessness with the kind of moral clarity that's necessary? Are they talking about the wars? No. You know what they do. It's all about sensationalism, and it's all about the horse race aspect of politics. This person tweeted this, and then Trump tweeted this. Now, it's fine to talk about all that stuff. I'm not against talking about all that stuff. I do it too. But you should be clear as to what are the real scandals and where the focus should be in politics and what we need to fix. And they don't do that, not in any serious way. So that's the problem, Brian, is that oftentimes from new media outlets like this one, where I make dick jokes and fart jokes and laugh and joke around, I'm still somehow more serious than you because I focus on real stories and put the onus on the real stories. The other point is CNN, MSNBC, and many traditional corporate media outlets, they serve as gatekeepers. They keep the Overton window, which is the spectrum of thoughts that are thinkable, the spectrum of thoughts that are allowed, they keep that spectrum significantly further to the right than it should be. So, in other words, the furthest left you can go in mainstream media is, center left. Center left. You can be in favor of not hating minorities. Don't hate gay people. Don't hate black people. But can you really be in favor of overhauling our financial system? Can you really be in favor of kicking the mafia middlemen and the for-profit health insurance companies to the corner? No, those voices are so more rare on those airwaves. Like, basically the only Bernie supporter that any of them have on is Nina Turner. Like, that's it. CNN has her on, and then that's it. Like, there's very few real Bernie supporters and social democrats who are represented, and it gives a misleading picture. Because they try to make you think, well, the furthest left you could go is like Joe Biden or Pete Buttigieg or Kamala Harris. And that is just, they treat Bernie like he's a madman, when in reality, according to the polls, he's representing the will of the people way more. So that's the other function of corporate media, is to limit the Overton window and serve as gatekeepers. Hey, you can only go this far left, but no further. You can't really question the fundamental underpinnings of the society. You can't do that. And the other point is, Brian, there's a reason why you were hired. It's not like Brian's interpreting this like Foz is saying it's more conspiratorial than it really is. Like, Foz knows, Brian, that people don't come up to you and say, like, psst, you're not allowed to talk about X, Y, and Z. But the reality is, you were hired because they thought, more or less, you're safe. So you probably aren't going to discuss X, Y, and Z because you're not as interested in X, Y, and Z because it just doesn't cross your radar as much and it's not a passion of yours. Look at somebody like Wolf Blitzer. There's a reason why he's on CNN 87 hours a day, because he doesn't rock the boat. He doesn't deviate too much from the status quo. I always go back to that conversation that Wolf Blitzer was having with Rand Paul. Rand Paul said, hey, we should probably stop arming Saudi Arabia. They're committing a genocide in Yemen. And Wolf Blitzer's response was, well, what about the jobs? What about the profits of the defense contractors? See, that's why he was hired. Because you're only going to go so far in your criticism, and you're not going to rock the boat too much. You're going to more or less side with the establishment and not really overturn the apple cart. That's why they're hired. That's why it's Don Lemon and Anderson Cooper and Brian Stelter and Wolf Blitzer. It's that they know you're relatively safe. They know you're not Kyle Kulinski. And then the final point is this. When you talk about mainstream media, there are various biases, okay? The three main ones, I think, are, first and foremost, a sensationalism bias, because they want people to watch. So when you do a sensationalism bias, they will take, celebrity stories, gossip stories, Kim Kardashian shit, Kanye West stuff, the A$AP Rocky thing with Trump, and, they will talk about that way more than they should and care about that way more than they should. Because they think, oh, this is going to get us better ratings. That's the sensationalism bias. Really unimportant stuff that's put front and center because they think it'll get them eyeballs. Another kind of bias they have is the establishment bias. The establishment bias is, furthest right you could go is standard Republican politicians. That's Fox News, the propaganda arm of the Republican Party. Furthest left you could go is the Democratic Party. That's MSNBC. Propaganda for the Democratic Party. Not pushing for leftism or social democracy. No. Pushing for the Democratic Party and their philosophy of neoliberal centrism. So that's the establishment bias. They color within the lines by and large. And then the final one is the neutrality bias, which is, especially on CNN, less so on MSNBC because they're just the Democratic Party's propaganda arm. But on CNN, on CBS, ABC, the nightly news, what they have is a neutrality bias where they do their best to try to call everything 50-50. Now, they don't always do it. Sometimes they say, hey, Republicans are wrong and Democrats are right about this. But they really do bend over backwards to try to act like the truth is 50-50 between the two parties. And we're going to give you both sides of this. Hey, Bernie says Medicare for all is good, but all the Republicans say it's an evil government takeover of healthcare that will create a death panel and kill your grandma. So they don't care about objectivity. They care more about neutrality. And neutrality is not the same thing as objectivity. It's not a 50-50 proposition as to whether giving birth is because women give birth or the stork brings a baby. You can't say, oh, some people say this, some people say this. That's ridiculous. We know that there's an answer on that. We know evolution versus creationism. That's not a debate. Creationism is not true. Evolution is true. So it's not 50-50, but oftentimes they'll present it as such. They'll have a debate on CNN about climate change. Let's have Marsha Blackburn versus a climate scientist and see how that goes. Marsha Blackburn's a Republican congresswoman who doesn't know Dickie McGee's Act and takes money from fossil fuel industries. So that's the other bias. Establishment bias, sensationalism bias, neutrality bias. And Foz did a great job there. Brian Stelter seems like he's playing dumb on purpose, which is kind of sad to see. But yes, there is a massive difference between a right-wing criticism of media and a left-wing criticism of media, mainstream media. Trump's criticism of the fake news media can basically be summed up like this. You guys aren't doing enough propaganda for me, and you dare to criticize me ever about anything. I don't like that. That's Trump's criticism of the media summed up. That's what it is. A left-wing criticism of the media is, hey man, you guys are not focused on the real important issues that you should be focused on, and you guys aren't even hearing out in any serious way a social democratic position which represents the overwhelming majority of the American people. And you're not holding the powerful accountable. That's the left-wing criticism. Now, there's obviously a substantive difference there. But if you notice at the end, Brian Stelter tried to conflate the two. Oh, well, bashing the media will work for Trump, so maybe it'll work for you guys. As if the criticisms are the same. They're not remotely the same. You guys know that, but a lot of people are playing dumb and pretending not to know that.